Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. It is the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session, part one and part two.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Ah, yes. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Sue Jeffers. This is Tim-Utz. I frequently paraphrase Mark Twain when I say, the legislature's in session, nobody's safe. So the legislative session ended. We think we're safe, but we're not, are we, Tim?
No, we're not, Sue. We still got the special session. But how you doing, Sue? We got to get that out. We got to get that out.
I'm wonderful. Thank you so
much. It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while, and I think the legislative session ended, and now we're in this negotiating time. We're in this what I call let's make a deal time, which is the most dangerous time of the session for the taxpayers.
I think it's probably worse than a regular session because this all happens behind closed doors, which is technically illegal according to the open meeting laws and so on. And so a lot of things are happening being agreed on that we will not hear about till after it's law.
Where's the accountability?
There isn't
Where's
any.
The transparency?
There isn't any.
Where's the open forum where we're supposed to be able, and you're right, we are not going to hear the details of some of these bills that were agreed on to end the legislative session until after it's been passed.
And this is what happened last year. With Palenti, the same thing.
Exactly.
We had a special session, cutting the last deal in the back rooms, and when all the dust was settled, we saw what we had. It was a mess.
And the deal that they cut last year is how we got the $39 billion budget and the $5 billion deficit. They spent money they didn't have, made promises they couldn't keep, and here we are in the same mess all over again.
Yep, just another year later.
Okay, let's recap what happened for the session, because a lot of people, they're working their jobs, they're raising their families, they're trying to make their house payment, they're trying to afford money for gas. They might not have been paying attention over the course of the legislative session. It started pretty good. Everybody got there, sounded tough, sounded like they were going to get a lot of work done.
Make things happen, right. I'll just give you some technical information, a few things. The Minnesota House had 64 days that they actually met. And they are allowed to have 120 days in the 2-year cycle. So next year they can only meet for
10 weeks.
Yeah, 10 weeks. But they can only have so many days that then they have to quit. They also introduced 1,761 bills. Now we've got to remember the purpose of the session this year. The focus was to be the budget, balancing the budget. But we introduced 1,761 bills while we were at it. We had 5,318 pages of text that was produced during the legislative session. So those
5,318 pages of text.
And it's fine print text.
Yes.
And it's all online. Go to Minnesota House. You can read it all yourself and see what they did and what they said.
I want to stress again to the viewers that I think is so important. This is a budget year. And what the Republicans did, they came in and and we've argued about this over and over and over, that Minnesota has a spending problem. And at the end of this year, we realize Minnesota still has a spending problem. And what the Republicans did is they came in and they said, all right, the state of Minnesota is generating revenues of about $34 billion. Therefore, our budget in these shaky economic times will be $34 billion. They then assigned all their committee chairs and the people to the different committees. They had all their different bills put together, whether it was taxes, whether it was transportation, education, all the different bills. And we're going to go into some detail on these in a little bit. But inserted into all these bills is a lot of policy when it should have been focused on the budget. And you have to have some policy because you need to know where the money is going to be spent. But on the other hand, these big giant mess of bills full of money and policy and I call them garbage can bills.
Yes.
Technically, they're an omnibus bill. Tell us about an omnibus bill.
So an omnibus bill, that is a bill that has more than one subject in it. So I'll give you an example. We have general funding bills, and there's different departments. We have Department of Transportation, Health and Human Services, K-12 education, higher education, public safety, taxes, and a variety of other legislative bills. Those combined together create the $34 billion of spending in the next biennium. One example is transportation. House File 1140 was passed by the House and the Senate and given to the governor, and he vetoed the bill along with all the other funding bills. But in that bill, there's not just transportation, and this is where it becomes illegal from the constitutional perspective. And included in transportation was the carbon monoxide poisoning education program. It's unrelated to transportation. Expanding permit requirements for boat docks. Now, that sounds kind of goofy, but what it is the state of Minnesota charges businesses and organizations when they transport across the state fees for special permits. Those fees now have been expanded. So if you have a boat dock at your home and you're taking it to your lake home, now you have to buy a permit. I believe the fee was $120 or $140. Now, previously to this bill, you didn't have to get a permit for that. But now you have to, if this bill passes as is, you would have to have a permit to take your boat dock down the road.
Tax increase.
So it's a tax increase. It's broadening the tax base onto other forms of activity and commerce. Again, you mentioned before, we are in a biennium. The first year of the biennium is a budget year where we're supposed to balance the budget for the next 2 years, and actually technically on to the next 4 years. The second year is a bonding bill, and that's where you usually get the transportation spending and whatnot set up for roads and bridges and other forms of transportation. That's supposed to be the focus of how it works. Now, it always doesn't work that way, and I don't believe this year it worked that way either, but that gives you an example.
I don't remember the last time it worked that way, Tim. I don't remember. I'm just thankful that next year they only get to meet for 10 weeks. And the less time they're over there, the less damage that can be done. Now, one of the things that we talked about was how dangerous this time of the session is, because all of the meetings that are being held behind closed doors makes it very hard for the taxpayers to find out what is being put into this final agreement that Governor Dayton will eventually have to sign into law. So let's talk about some of the facts about the budget. Here's a fact. Last year's budget was $30.1 billion for the year 2010-2011. The budget proposal by the Republicans for this year, $34 billion. It is the biggest budget in the history of the state of Minnesota. I contend the state of Minnesota still has a spending problem.
I would agree with you, yes.
All right. Governor Dayton is looking for $37 billion. Minnesota's only taking in $34 billion. He wants a tax increase to get the revenue to bring us up to $37 billion. And when you ask Governor Dayton, what are you going to spend that extra few $billion on? We don't know.
We don't know.
We have no idea. And that's where the policy becomes very important. That revenue increase between the 2010-11 budget and the 2012 and 13 budget is 8.5%. That's a pretty big, did you get an 8.5% raise this year?
No, I didn't, Sue. Not
Me either.
No.
Okay, now you're hearing about the schools. You're hearing the Republicans haven't funded the schools. You hear that every night on the news. K through 12, $400 million in increased spending. Health and Human Services. You hear about the nursing homes. You hear about the welfare. You hear about the various programs that for the needy and for the poor. $600 million increase. There are some areas of the budget that did receive cuts, but in my opinion, the state still has a spending problem. Definitely.